The email back from Steve Jobs just said, can I call you? And I yelled over to my wife in the kitchen and said, hey, Steve Jobs just emailed. And she said, yeah, sure.
We're about to dive into this interview with one of the engineers instrumental in bringing the beneficial health aspects of the Apple Watch, specifically the heart rate sensors, to fruition. But heart rate sensors are old news. We are here today to talk about inflammaging. Yes, the confluence and awareness of the dramatic impact that inflammation has on aging is what Bob's new technology is all about.
During that time, I started thinking about, okay, all of these measurements that are part of what's becoming what we know today as digital health. The big overarching goal and the vision that Steve Jobs was a part of was that.
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity Podcast. Our next guest is a health and technology maverick. He once sent a cold email to Steve Jobs. So our next guest, Bob Messerschmidt, not only did he send that email to Steve Jobs, but that email started a conversation with Steve Jobs, which ultimately led to Steve Jobs acquiring Bob's company, if I got all the data right. Think about this. We're about to dive into this interview with one of the engineers instrumental in bringing the beneficial health aspects of the Apple Watch, specifically the heart rate sensors, to fruition. But heart rate sensors are old news. We are here today to talk about inflammaging. Yes, the confluence and awareness of the dramatic impact that inflammation has on aging is what Bob's new technology is all about. So I met Bob at the Health Optimization Summit as his booth was right next to ours. You may know that we're working on an HSCRP study, which is also about inflammaging. So I was excited to see his technology. I must admit, I was Bob's best salesperson at that event. That's how much I loved the technology and love the technology. And I've since recommended, tens of people and practitioners to have a conversation with him. Bob has spent decades pushing the boundaries of personalized health, spectroscopy, and wearable diagnostics, and he is here today to share his latest Apple Watch level technology designed to help users test, track, and solve the root cause of disease. Bob, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and it was a great pleasure to meet you at Health Optimization Summit. You definitely sent a lot of traffic our way.
It was just so easy because I'm at my booth, I'm talking about the benefits our product does, and then I'm like, you've got to check out this technology because it can actually track what you're trying to do. So now, before we jump into your area of expertise, I like to go back. I like to go much further back. What was it like growing up, little Bob? Where did you grow up? What were your parents like? If there was some event or someone you could pinpoint as the reason you would ultimately become a tech entrepreneur, a health and wellness inventor, growing and selling amazing technologies and companies, what or who would they be?
Sure. Yeah. Wow. That goes way back in my case, but it's I grew up on the East Coast in Philadelphia, and was always a tech guy. I always liked mechanical stuff. I was a motorhead, so I was always taking apart cars and putting them back together again. But I realized that it was at school when I was at University of Pennsylvania. I got a job at a work study job at a laboratory, and there were a couple jobs available in this particular lab. One was the classic. I was studying to be a biochemist, and there was one job was the standard thing that biochemists do to make up samples. So you would club a rabbit over the head with a club and excise its muscle fiber and mix it up in a blender and make various chemistry solutions to study, sort of sciencey stuff that was interesting enough, but the laboratory was studying the mechanisms of muscle contraction. And you do this this particular lab did studies with rabbit muscles. And but what my mentor, this John Eccleston, the professor, was my first mentor, and he saw my eyes really light up at the idea that of building this instrumentation to make these measurements. So maybe I didn't even realize it at the time, but it became clear to him and to me that instrumentation using optics and spectroscopy was really what floated my boat. And that's really what I've done my entire career in various forms and guises.
How about parents? Like, were parents an influence on kind of your geekiness and your kind of mechanical aptitude?
My parents were probably the most mechanically disinclined people ever. My dad didn't drive even. As I say, they were mechanically disinclined, and my older brother and I both were not that way. We were both mechanically inclined and scientifically inclined. My older brother went to become a cardiac surgeon. So that meant the pressure was off me a little bit to be able to go out and find my own muse. I didn't have to. Although I started out at Penn as a pre-med student, I was able to pivot around and find my true muse.
That's pretty awesome. So you're mechanically inclined, right? Clearly, by the way, we share that similarity. I grew up, except I wasn't a motorhead. I think the first time I ever changed the oil in my car was probably at like 19 or 20. And my business partner just grew up super mechanically inclined, and he's like, you got to do this yourself. Like, not only do you save money, but it's just fun or whatever. I don't do that anymore, but I think it's good to know those things. So you're mechanically inclined, going towards medical school, kind of see that, maybe following your brother a little bit, but then biochemists, like, that seems interesting that you didn't go down. Why didn't you go more like I have a mechanical engineering degree. Why didn't you go more towards that?
Yeah, I just was not, I was interested in getting out into the workforce. So at that time, I remember thinking I didn't want to go for a graduate degree. So I didn't go for a graduate degree. I went straight from my bachelor's degree into the workforce. And it was just I was compelled to do that. I wanted to get out and build things. It's kind of like what kids today are talking about, right? About Peter Thiel and his various programs to get kids to go right from high school into the workforce, where they can learn. You can learn. I mean, I was an autodidact. I really would only learn things that I needed to know. Right? I wasn't great. Sitting down in a classroom. It was give me some problem, and then I'll assemble the tools that I need to be able to solve that problem. So, it was important for me to get out into the workforce. And like I say, my professor at Penn was my first mentor, but very quickly after the lab and after college, I went into the workforce in southwestern Connecticut, and my very first mentor was an entrepreneur. He had started a company building instrumentation for infrared spectroscopy, and actually he bought a company to do that. And this was in the East Coast, on the East Coast, and especially in those early days. It wasn't really a venture capital thing. That was a strange concept to those of us at that time on the East Coast. This was the sort of thing where he went to the bank every year and pledged all of his assets and his firstborn child, et cetera, and his house and his cars to the bank, and the bank would then give some operating capital for the business to survive and grow. And so Don Sting was his name. he, provided all of the early framework for how to run a business for me, and that was meaningful. And to some degree, I'm back to that kind of business model with the current company, COR Health.
Well, you're a quick learner, because I think one of the first companies you were heavily involved in ended up raising like $60 million in capital, right? So you're like, hey, there's another way to do this. Let's go down that path. Now, you are the only person probably at least that I know of, that interacted with Steve Jobs in any way. Did you have face to face with him? Did you get much time with him? What was he like? That sounds like and I don't know if you've read Isaacson's biography about Steve Jobs, but do you think that painted a good picture if you did read it?
Yeah, it did. There were many faces of Steve Jobs, though. I think I saw a different Steve Jobs than other people saw. And I just for context, I've been an Apple. I was an Apple fanboy since 1984. That's when I got my first Macintosh, which was the year they came out. And actually, this mentor I was just referring to, John Sting, he walked into the office one day with two Mac. They had a little handle on the top, if you remember the original all-in-one Macintosh. And he walked in beaming, with a big grin on his face, with two Macs, one in each hand, in each handle hold slot. And I said to him, Don, I know what that one is for. That's going in your office. But what about that other one? Can I have it? And so he gave it to me to use, and I created all. There was nothing like CAD software at the time, but I was creating instruction manuals, pictorial instruction manuals for word process documents with mech paint drawings to accompany the infrared microscope sort of products that I was designing and building back in those days.
I think that's exactly what sorry to interrupt. I think that's exactly what I used when we were building the equipment to manufacture our molecule, right? Because I hadn't yet taken CAD, because I did study engineering, or if I had taken CAD, I probably had taken CAD, but to get a hold of CAD software was a different beast altogether. So how do we make these things
with didn't exist.
Paint?
Yeah, exactly right. So, I knew of Steve Jobs, and I was a fan, and, had read all about him. And, so when I cold emailed him, I told him all this. I told him how much of a fan I was. And I also knew, I did some G2. I knew that he did actually read emails, unsolicited emails from people. He usually devoted a good portion of his Saturday morning, in fact, to reading emails from people. And, that's actually a good thing to do. I do it today when I get unsolicited emails. I don't, a lot of people just trash them, right? If it's somebody they don't know. VCs do, they don't take any information from anybody that isn't not a warm intro. But, Steve, SJ, as we called him, believed in doing that. And so I knew that would, that might have a chance of success. I didn't know his email address. So I had to guess that, and I guessed wrong the first time. I thought steve@apple.com. That's probably it. So I sent an email to steve@apple.com. And amazingly, I got a reply from a guy who had that email address, who was not Steve Jobs. But he was another Steve at Apple, and he said, "I'm probably not the Steve you're looking for." And that's all it said.
Man, that's fantastic. And I'm also thinking about your brother as a cardiac surgeon. There is a competition. How do you one up that? You get a measurement device on the wrist of, I don't know, how many people have an Apple Watch at this point? It's tens of millions, I would think.
I think it's hundreds of millions. It became a breakout hit. So the email back from Steve Jobs just said, "Can I call you?" And this was a Saturday morning, as I previously alluded to. And I yelled over to my wife in the kitchen and said, "Hey, Steve Jobs just emailed." And she said, "Yeah, sure."
And I'm assuming you replied right away and then stood by your phone.
Exactly, yeah, and it rang almost instantly. And I was talking to Steve Jobs, and it was the let's see, the iPhone. This was 2008. The iPhone had been introduced the year before. There's a funny story about the launch of the iPhone too. I made a side trip from my wedding rehearsal to go and stand in line at the mall to get the very first iPhone.
Wow.
So it was not
Absolute fan. That's awesome. So what that
absolutely,
feel like?
absolutely.
Steve Jobs calls you.
Yeah. Yeah. So he calls me and he said, I'm really interested in what you wrote in your email, but we're looking for products that we can introduce right now. So as I said, it was 2008. And the level of iOS at the time, they were just about at the Worldwide Developer Conference, they were going to introduce iOS 3, which was going to be the first version of iOS that had an app store associated with it. So the previous iOS 1 and 2, there was no app store. Every app on your iPhone was made by Apple. And so, or some, or a very close ally of Apple. And so iOS 3 was going to open up this thing, which became huge, right? The App Store became huge. And he was looking for technologies that could go in the App Store. And, so he was actively looking for acquisitions. But it was clear through the conversation that we were, this technology that I had invented and was proving out in my garage. It was a very, very much of interest to him, but we were too early. We didn't have a product. It wasn't going to be ready for launch at Worldwide Developer Conference. That was like about 6 weeks away.
Yeah.
And so, we said, okay, we'll agree to keep talking. And it was a process of about a year, actually a bit longer than a year. Late in 2009, after I met with, and described the technology to a bunch of other people and developed the technology further, it was another meeting with Steve Jobs, this time in person. And he threw up his New Balance sneakers up onto the big conference room table and said, we're interested in your technology. Basically, tell me your number.
Wow. Were you prepared for that moment? And by the way, the technology was really checking the pulse, right? Using infrared technology. Is that
Actually not? It was an unrelated. It was a health tech measurement. I don't want to get too specific about what it was because that particular technology does still not exist in any Apple product, and it's still being worked on. So it's an unannounced product, and Apple has more lawyers than engineers in Cupertino.
Yeah. So we'll be very. So it was a very cool technology. Were you prepared to give him a number? Like, did you kind of think that was going to happen when you got there?
I kind of was ready for that, and he came back and countered with a number that was exactly half of my number, and and we agreed to a deal.
Awesome, man. That is fantastic. Now, often when big companies like Apple are acquiring other companies, much smaller companies, some of it's for the IP, right, the intellectual property, and some of it's for the team. Like, and you, I think, were the lead piece of the team. Was this they wanted you to come and work with them as much as they wanted your technology? You have a sense of that piece, and how long did you end up working with them?
Yeah, no, it was not. It was not a team hire. It was not which they call an aqua hire. It was not that, because we had I didn't have a team. It was really just the company was so small that it was just me. In fact, there's another funny story about when Steve Jobs thought that so I was going to be the only continuing employee through this acquisition. And at one point, he thought that another guy who was an investor of ours he thought that this other guy was also going to be a continuing employee. He got some bad information somehow. And my iPhone rings. I'm out throwing the tennis ball in the cul-de-sac with my neighbor and his dog. And the phone rings and it comes up on my phone, Steve Jobs. And I say to my neighbor, "Hey, Steve Jobs is calling."
They're like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You know.
And he starts yelling, and he says, who the expletive is this guy, and why the expletive would I want to hire him?
Wow. Okay. Well, so you got to see this side of Jobs that's kind of presented in that biography,
A
right?
little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
I cleared up the misunderstanding, and then it was back to nice again. For the most part, I saw a side of him that was, when he was looking to acquire, he was in full on sell mode, right? It was like, I think about, it was not in Isaacson's biography, but there was another book that talked about, I guess it was Jobs' own book, talking about how he brought John Scully on board at Apple, as he brought Scully on as CEO at one point. And Scully was working. He was the CEO or president at Pepsi Cola. And Steve was in full recruitment mode. He said, "You want to make sugar water the rest of your life." That's that sort of thing.
Or actually deliver value to people. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
right,
it was for me, it was a no-brainer. I wanted to work at this company that I had admired for forever, basically.
That's very cool. Well, it's exciting. I didn't realize that the technology wasn't even out yet. So we're like, our conversation with you, and you've already moved on to something else. Like we're way ahead of things here. I really, really appreciate that piece.
Well, yeah. Well, so the what we didn't talk about was that while I was there, so they acquired my technology, which is an interesting story in and of itself, and it will probably become part of a product at some point. But while I was there, Steve was also starting up another project, an app that became the Apple Watch, and yet another project that would become Apple Health as a set of services. And he asked me to be read in on both of those projects, in addition to this acquired technology, which, so there were really three different things that I was doing at Apple. And, with the Apple Watch project, I was having meetings in the design studio a couple times a week with Johnny Ive and his team, figuring out it was all about user experience and reducing friction, from Jobs' perspective. And so, architecting the sensors that became part of the Apple Watch, I think, was probably my most important legacy at Apple, and that had nothing to do with the technology that they acquired from me.
But so, that makes me think that his acquirer was like acquiring the team. The team was just you.
The team was just me, and then he gave me a team. There was a team available. So I did have engineers working on my team, and so once I got onto the Apple Watch project, I ended up working to proof. We called it architecting. I was a platform architect, but it's really like proof of concept, right? So I worked on the early ideation and proof of concept of a number of the sensors, including the heart rate sensor and the temperature sensor and things like that, which are, have now become part of the watch, and, a number of other sensor technologies that are still not part of the watch.
Interesting. That's okay. That's awesome. I'm excited to see what more is coming. Let's get into your current technology, right? So it's COR Health. You got bought out by Apple. You worked with Apple some period of time. How long did it take you? Like you decided to move on, or that whatever happened there, if you want to share. And then how long did it take you to kind of land in on this what's called ESR technology? And we'll talk about what that is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess I would say I was always a bit of a fish out of water at Apple because Apple is great, and but they are a really big company, and with any big company, there's a bureaucracy, and that's not something that I tolerate well. I am first and foremost a startup guy, and so there was a mismatch there, so as soon as I could. I did leave. And so that was about 4 years. I was there for, 3 to 4 years. During that time, I started thinking about, okay, all of these measurements that are part of what's becoming what we know today as digital health. The big overarching goal and the vision that Steve Jobs was a part of was that we can take all of these, by giving people these measurements directly, this data directly, we can allow them to basically take charge and have self-efficacy over their own health improvement. So, Steve believed this as far back as, this goes back before Apple Health and the Apple Watch. It goes back to the iPhone. And the idea that once you have this much computing horsepower and screen real estate in your pocket, there are all these things that you can do yourself that you don't no longer have to cede to an expert. And, Steve being a radical, he very much liked this idea of, radical personalization of and empowering people, because he was also a student of sociology and human behavior. And he knew that empowerment is, in itself health producing, right? So the fact that you feel like you have agency and ability to improve your health through tools like, that he was going to put into the Apple Watch, that's the elusive dream. And we're still not very far down that road. We're still very early days in terms of digital health as a thing, right? What are we able to really do today to empower people? I started thinking about the sorts of measurements that you can get from wearables. And, especially since my background was chemistry and optics and spectroscopy, I started thinking, well, this information that we're getting from wearables is pretty surface level, right? So it's undoubtedly meaningful, but if we could get information from blood, right? If we could get more chemistry information from blood and give that directly to people, now we could help them even more. We could empower them even more. So, and that is something that Apple was never really particularly interested in, because there's friction associated with getting a blood drop, right? And it's the elusive dream is, well, how do you do this? Yeah, it's the Star Trek tricorder, right? How do you just scan somebody and get all of this data? Well, the reality is the data's in the blood. So if you don't get the blood, it's really, really tough to get the data. So you can you can sort of nibble around the edges of that. But the reason I started COR Health was to start from that starting point of a drop of blood and, be able to give better information to people. And then, just through a various turn of events, the thing that I decided to focus on was in particular inflammation, because it was everywhere. It was in the zeitgeist. And there was no really good way for people to be able to get data about their inflammation. So That's what COR is all about.
It's in the zeitgeist. It's inflammation. You're aware that you need to start, and I think you even had started a company, changed its name to COR Health at some point, right? And so, what were you initially looking at? Were you just looking at maybe, I don't know, minerals and talk us through this kind of evolution? Because I think you've landed in the right space, but there's always this like, oh, let's look at this. What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think I would say I overcorrected at first. So there have been two different products, two different hardware products. One was this predecessor company that you talked about, which had COR as its brand name, and that was the hardware. There was an infrared spectrometer, really lab quality infrared spectrometer that people could use in their homes. It was a multi-million-dollar development effort. We ended up raising for that predecessor company. We ended up raising $12 million of venture capital. Not quite like Rio Grande with 60 million, but we raised 12 plus some angels.
Well, partners, right? Rio Grande had six partners, so like
a lot of six co-founders. Six co-founders. Which was interesting. I
thought about going down that path because I can imagine it would have been a very interesting conversation about six co-founders, but let's stay on target.
Okay, fair enough. So COR Health was one founder, me, and it was like any, and it was really so. After my success at Apple, it was pretty easy to get VC meetings with whoever I wanted to, get a meeting with. Although it was still not easy to raise a Series A. I would say, and I've been known to say that raising a Series A from a top tier venture capital firm is, in fact, the hardest thing to do in business.
Wow.
And I believe that. So we did it. We were able to raise. The very first investment came from Khosla Ventures, and a partner named Keith Raboy, who is on the Midas list as one of the all-time most successful venture capital investors ever. And he and Vinod Khosla both took an interest in the technology that I was developing for the finger stick drop of blood measurement using an infrared spectrometer. And we developed that. There was a second round of investment where Keith, by this time, had moved over to Founders Fund. And so there was a second round of investment, or a second tranche. Keith at Founders Fund teamed up with Vinod at Khosla Ventures, and they shared the lead of that second part of the round. Anyway, it was a big hardware development, and then COVID happened, and we were late to market. I don't want to blame COVID, but it did slow us down. And then the investment environment sort of changed in 2021, 2022. And we were unable to raise a follow-on round. But I would say we were mostly to blame for getting our technology to market a little bit too late. This story has been told 1,000 times. And so then I pivoted. So I pivoted and then decided to focus. The big learning for me from that experience was that our hardware was super expensive. So we wanted to sell to consumers, because selling directly to consumers is what I fell in love with at Apple, right? The idea that you could empower people directly with this information. That's what gets me up in the morning. But the technology was too expensive. It was the hardware cost of goods was, a couple $1,000s, which is, you're not going to get a lot of scale, when you're selling a device that expensive. So I pivoted to seeing the increasing importance of inflammation. I realized that I could do a single measurement of erythrocyte sedimentation rate in a hardware device, and I could basically deep six all of the hardware parts that related to spectroscopy. And it really now is more of a camera image-based technology in the current Core One, the core device. And instead of $2,000 cost of goods, now the hardware has a $50 cost of goods. And it's a really good biomarker of inflammation that we're getting. And we can talk a lot more about ESR and why I'm, I guess I have a cyclical sort of fanboy mode, but I'm the biggest fan of in the world of the ESR measurement at the moment.
Yeah, let's jump into that. So it's interesting. It must have been a little bit challenging to kind of let go of spectroscopy, right? Because it's been everything for you for so long, and then like, oh, it's much easier. But then there's this appeal of actually being able to deliver value, which is probably like, I don't think a core value is bringing spectroscopy to the to the masses. The core value is actually the value that the potential spectroscopy could have brought, and now you're landed there.
You're right. I do want to bring that back at some point. We will at some point relaunch a spectrometer technology, but that's a topic for another day.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
Okay, so what is ESR? What are the pros and cons? Like, how long have people been researching ESR? What in the world is a erythrocyte?
Yeah. So the question is, if you do a Google search or a ChatGPT search of what markers are there of inflammation, there's this one, the granddaddy of them all, erythrocyte sedimentation rate. It's kind of an indirect measurement, and that turns off some people that it's indirect. It's not measuring the explicit concentration of some chemical in blood. Like CRP is measuring directly the concentration of a pro-inflammatory protein called C-reactive protein, and it's measuring a concentration of that in blood. ESR, on the other hand, is measuring the rate at which red blood cells fall in a column of blood. So if you hold blood in a tube vertically under the force of gravity, the red cells are going to separate from the blood plasma, and the rate at which they fall out of the plasma is called the ESR, the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, and it's expressed in terms of millimeters per hour. But you don't need to measure it for a whole hour to get the measurement. We can provide the answer at 30 minutes. There are some other, there's possibility of even doing it at 20 minutes. So what causes the sedimentation rate? So this is 100 years ago. People figured out that that rate was related to all sorts of changes in the proteins in blood. And mainly pro-inflammatory proteins. So the abundance or the presence of more pro-inflammatory proteins, including CRP, higher levels of these pro-inflammatory proteins would cause the red blood cells to clump together into what's called a rouleau formation. They basically, red blood cells stack together like a stack of lifesavers. And when they stack, because they're sticky now, in the presence of inflammation, they become sticky. They stack together. When they stack, they become heavier, and therefore they drop faster. And so ESR has proven to be, a really elegant, simple measurement of inflammation, incredibly well validated. It's been shown in numerous research studies to be a strong and independent predictor of all-cause mortality. So inflammation causes mortality. Mortality is the inverse of longevity. So, ESR, just as a single number, is, a really strong predictor of longevity.
Well, I just want to throw this out there. Your test had me at 20 plus years younger from the kind of biological number.
Yeah.
Well, let's pause here for a second because I got questions about the different components that it might be looking at and even glycans. But how does that look like? How many of these tests have you done at this point, or have people done? And do you have access to the data once it ends up in somebody else's hands if they give it to, like, what is that like? So we have this kind of idea of how much data you're accumulating.
Yeah, sure. So there's multiple stages to how we've brought it to market. We, of course, first had to validate it before we launched it onto the market. So we validated it against using a laboratory, a third-party laboratory. We validated it against the lab methods, and we found strong correlation with the lab ESR measurements. So we first of all knew that we had a measurement that did reflect truly the ESR.
I want to pause here for just 1 second because I imagine you're like me, and as you kind of go through projects and putting things together, you get into a situation. I was once working on a project that was looking at pressure, and like, just use this curve, right? This calibration curve, and you'll have your pressure. And we're like, let's double check that, and it's almost always wrong. And so did you look at comparing different labs to each other? Because I just have a sense that if you were to compare labs to each other, it might be like similar to your, like, just throw your device in the mix and it's probably about the same as that. They're all going to be different, which people don't realize, right?
People don't realize that.
No, I got my ESR number from this company. It is going to be the same as this other company. It's probably not. I don't know. How much did you dive into that?
Yeah, we calibrated it using one particular laboratory, and we will eventually calibrate. We'll compare to other laboratories. But you're absolutely right. This data is out there for any blood biomarker measurement you can think of. There's tremendous amounts of data about lab to lab variability, and it is pretty shocking. So and it's not well understood by most people, including clinicians, that the number that they get back has some error bars on it, and some pretty big error bars. So like I've been to the doctor and, who said my vitamin D is low, so maybe it's, I forget the units or the number, but let's say it was 50, right? And I went back, a few months later and it was 53. And he said, "Oh, hey, your vitamin D is better. It's great. Good job." Right? But in terms of the error bars, a 50 and a 53 are really the same number.
Yeah.
There's really no difference. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of misconception. You can look at proficiency test data. You're familiar with that, I'm sure. So if you're a laboratory making measurements on human blood samples, you go through a process of proficiency testing, usually 3 times a year. And they send you a standardized sample, and they send the very same sample out to 1,000 laboratories. And they all report what number they measure. The whole panel of numbers they measure from that sample, they report it back. And the governing organization, like the Clinical Association of Pathologists, they take all that data and they publish it. So you can look that up. And, a number like HDL or LDL, there are 20% error bars, from laboratory to laboratory. In many cases, even more. Vitamin D is particularly bad. The error bars can be, 30 or 40, sometimes even 50%.
So you hone in on one particular one, and now you're comparing them to them, and you're within the error bars of them.
Yeah, for one lab, right? Exactly right. And so, we know other labs are going to be different. But honestly, what matters is we don't want to use ESR as a diagnostic. So we're not looking to keep people below some sort of normal range threshold. What we're trying to do is to get them to lower their ESR, whatever it is, right? So it really doesn't so much matter that we are the same number that they would get from a lab. We want them to collect linear data using our device, and the measurement to measurement error on the same device is going to be tiny, right? So we want to be able to get people to not be normal range with their ESR. We want them to be like you are, right? We want them to be optimal range with their ESR. And by the way, it was not just you at the show with a very good optimal range ESR. It was everybody at your company was a
Wow.
particularly low ESR, which my takeaway from that is what these guys are selling is actually really working for ESR, so for inflammation. So that was kind of cool to see.
Well, and some people at our booth, honestly, I'm doing a lot of the things, right? I'm really focused on diet. I'm really focused on exercise. And some of the people on our team are not, and that shows. And the fact that their ESR is in a great range is
Absolutely, yeah. I'm
pretty
I'm
cool.
I'm not an extreme athlete myself, and I can manage through lifestyle changes. I can manage my ESR to a kind of an optimal level through lifestyle means. So that's what's exciting about it, right? That you can, and that's going to it's strongly correlated with longevity. Following those sorts of strategies.
That's very cool. How so you can think about there's a fasting glucose level, which is like where are you at today? You can look at A1C, which is more of like a 2 to 3 month kind of average. How does ESR sit? Like if I take one today and then I eat really good tomorrow, will I see it tomorrow, or what does that look like?
Yeah, yeah, you will. You'll see it. It'll change. You'll see an impact of a dietary strategy within a day,
Wow.
but the fullness of it will be over a few weeks. So we think the cadence for lifestyle change activities, and coincidentally, it kind of conforms with the idea of what you need to do in order to create a habit, right? So the BJ Fogg and people like that who think about habit formation, they think you keep doing a new strategy in your lifestyle. You do it for a few weeks, three weeks, they would say, right? So if we like this idea of 2 week experimental frameworks where you do something for a couple weeks, and the cadence of ESR testing, well, the cadence of inflammation testing, I think should be weekly because it requires a drop of blood. So you don't want to be doing that every day or intraday or anything like that, right? So you want to be able to, and the biochemical processes that are involved are going to take a few weeks to fully change based on your new lifestyle strategy. So it seems like you want a marker that is fast enough to be able to react fully, kind of on a week-to-week time basis, and ESR is certainly fast enough for that. You probably don't want a marker that's faster than that. So CRP is probably faster to respond. Like if you start coming down with a virus, influenza or something like that, your CRP will spike immediately. Your ESR will start going up a few days later. It'll start going up the next day, but then it'll continue going up. And then it'll be
Okay.
slower to come down. Now, the interesting story is on the back end, on the coming down side. I think ESR is reflecting a more accurate story about inflammation still being present in your body. So your CRP can return back down to baseline pretty quickly when the acute part of the infection is gone. It's called an acute phase reactant, in fact. But the chronic part of the effect that viral infection has had on your body, that still persists. And ESR can reflect that. So I'm thinking back to a podcast. I'm not even sure they called them podcasts back in 2012 when this one was recorded, but it was by David Agus. David Agus is a noted Los Angeles-based clinical physician. He was actually Steve Jobs's personal physician, and he was giving a presentation somewhere that got recorded, and he was talking about how if you get a viral infection, let's say you're not vaccinated for influenza, and you get the flu, you're going to get really sick. You're not going to die from it, but you're going to be laid up for a while. And your inflammation curve is going to go up, and it's going to take a while to come back down. It's going to take weeks, maybe a month, to come back down to baseline. And the impact of that single inflammatory event from not getting vaccinated and instead getting the flu, it's not going to kill you. But that whole inflammation process from getting the flu has taken a couple of months off your lifespan. Just from that influenza event. So that said to me, okay, you really want to be tracking your inflammation so that you can start these strategies to get back down to baseline quicker. Yeah. And so how are you going to do that without a device in your home? So that's it would get way too expensive to do a glycan age test weekly, right? Or to even do a CRP test weekly would get way too expensive, and there'd be way too much friction associated with it. So that's the problem we're looking to solve, to give you repeated episodic data on at least a weekly cadence.
Yeah, I think that's why I was so enamored with your technology. It's like, hey, you're trying to track these things. You do have a biological age component. I think when you start digging into those types of tests, like an age one that you mentioned, and I'll bring up a kind of follow-up question here in a second, but you got to mail that off, and there's a lag between getting it done, and it's expensive, right? And yours, talk real quick, because I think it's very relevant to this very specific piece of the conversation.
Yeah.
How much is the device, and how much, how low of a cost can you get the per test price down to?
Yeah. It's still around $10 per test, right? That's what it comes down to. So we have two different revenue models.
But hold on, let's pause there for $10 a test, and you've got an answer in 30 minutes versus, I can tell you, we looked at HSCRP. We couldn't find anything below $50, right? We actually ended up going with one a little bit more expensive because it had other markers, but in the $50 range. And then you've got to put blood on a panel, so that's about equal, but then you've got to mail it off. There's all sorts of possibilities of getting lost in the mail, contamination, like just all sorts of things, as opposed to taking this drop into a capillary tube, sticking it in a device, and in 30 minutes you've got an answer. Like it's just night and day.
Yeah, it's night and day. And I want it to be lower. I want the cost to be even lower on a per test basis. So because I think $10, that's fine for you and me, but there's still people that we want to give access to for whom that's a lot of money. So we charge. We either sell the device, and then it's sort of $10 per test, and you buy tests. You can buy tests a la carte. They're a single-use disposable test tube. Or you can now do a subscription model where you pay $49 a month, and you get 5 tests. You get the device basically to use for free during the time that you are that you have an active subscription, and we're sending you 5 additional test tubes every month for $50. So it's like I say, $10 a month. Even and you don't have any upfront costs from the device. But I want it to be $1, right? I have this business mentor of mine who I alluded to earlier is a type 1 diabetic. He's been diabetic since he was 8 years old, and he's in his 70s now. He interestingly put the very first money in Google. He was the very first institutional investor in Google, so he's done okay. So
he's less concerned about the $10 to $1 price point.
Well, but he isn't. He's very concerned. I mean, he wants it to be $1 because his glucose test strips are $1.
Yeah, makes sense.
And they followed a similar trajectory. They were at one time $10.
Man, that's really exciting. I want to get into a little bit more of you've referenced HSCRP, and it may have been because we've kind of I've incidentally steered it that way. Does this compare to like interleukin 6, TNF alpha? Are all these also interrelated when you have elevated level? And by the way, these are much more expensive to test, as it turns out. Are there parallels with ESR and those?
Yes, indeed. In fact, ESR is reflecting, IL-6 and the other cytokines are contributors to the ESR signal.
And how about so we mentioned glycan age. That's looking at glycans. In preparing for this interview, or so many of these things come in downtime when you're not actually preparing for the interview. I was like, wait, I wonder if the glycans, right, these sugar molecules that attach to your hemoglobin, are they part of that process of also making it sticky? And so then interesting.
They are, absolutely. So glycan age is a very particular glycan. So there's all kinds of, any protein goes through a glycation or glycosylation process. Every protein in your body does. But the glycan age is particularly measuring glycosylation in the IgG, immunoglobulin G molecule. And, that's the sticky part. And that contributes to the ESR elevation as one of the things. Although I would say the predominant pro-inflammatory protein contributing to the ESR signal is not glycans or IL-6 or CRP, although it's reflecting all of those. It's also reflecting fibrinogen. So fibrinogen is the much more abundant pro-inflammatory protein in your blood plasma. And you won't hear about, just like you don't hear as much about anything but CRP anymore, you also won't hear much about fibrinogen. But if you look back in the research, you'll see that fibrinogen is strongly correlated with CRP. So you could, instead of measuring CRP, you could be measuring fibrinogen concentration directly. And it's just that, like a lot of things in medicine, it has more to do with the money, right? You have to follow the money trail to see why one thing is preferred over another thing. And, CRP had a better PR agent, right, than fibrinogen did. And so that's what gets measured these days. But, they're all contributors. They are all contributors to the ESR signal.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. Have you, so talk about like how much data you have and what you've learned from it as a kind of a wrap up, if you could, and then we'll get into our wrap up questions.
Yeah. So we've as you talked about earlier, we have a biological age number now, which we couldn't do until we had a lot of data from in our database from core users. So that's one thing that makes our age number a little bit different is like to build a glycan age number, which is a very good marker of longevity. Don't get me wrong. But it is built upon a lot of data that's from studies in the literature, right? So you have like a big population of data from disparate studies. So you have to stitch all this data together. What we wanted to do was we wanted to build a marker based on not only just ESR data, but very specifically ESR data measured with the COR 1 device. So we have a model because we know we have anonymized, de-identified data from all of our users. This is obviously we're very careful about data privacy and making sure that the data sets are never linked to the individualized identity. But we do have age and gender in the model. And so we can say, okay, in the core data, and there are now over 10,000 samples that people have run using the COR 1 device. And we can say, okay, first of all, it's reported that there's an age dependence in ESR data, which it's actually essential that there is one, if I'm going to claim that there's an age dependence, right? And there is. So we have a very clear, in our own data sets, we have an age dependence. It's also reported in the literature that female inflammation is different. It's on a different scale from male inflammation for any particular given age. So we calibrate separately. Females in our data set, inflammation is higher on average than males. And this, again, conforms to the literature. And so we can use, you can imagine if you have now a line with a non-zero slope, you can build a model based on that data, and you can say, okay, for the average user in the core population of that's a male of your age, Chris, what would the average ESR number be? And you're below that. You have a ESR number that is similar to a male in our population that's 20 years younger.
Yeah.
So we had to build that model, and it's kind of self-validating because it's based on this huge data set in our own population of data, and we don't have to rely on anybody else's data in order to build the model. So we think it's very concise, it's very focused, and it's simple, right? There are a lot of models that, and glycan age is fine. It's very scientifically generated, but it would be possible to create an age marker that was multivariate. It would be possible to overfit that model, right? It would be possible to say, okay, I have so much data that you can kind of like make any sort of line fit, and we're doing a very simple linear fit in our data. It's literally a straight line fit. You could do it with a piece of graph paper. And, very, very confident that, and then you combine that with the research knowledge that a lower ESR number actually does correlate with increased longevity. So that's been proven in like the Reykjavik study, which is a big longitudinal study of people that they followed for over 20 years. And, as people die off, they know their actual longevity. So we know ESR is a strong predictor of longevity.
Man, that's fantastic. It just reinvigorates. I'm sure we talked a little bit about this when we were kind of booth neighbors, that we should figure out some way to create some synergies. And
we should do that. Yeah.
And I've got some ideas, and I love the I don't know if you had the pricing model of $49 per month and you get 5 tests. Like that's a fantastic model that'll fit into a lot of people. I mean, there's just so many people who are looking at these biological age tests. Have you reached out to the Rejuvenation Olympics to kind of see if this is a number that could get added into it? That would be fascinating.
That would be, I don't know a lot about that, and we're like, as I said, we're very small. We're sort of bootstrapped now after our, sort of earlier product where we consumed a lot of VC money. But, in this new instantiation, we're bootstrapping, and, I want to do all that, but I don't want to hire the people that I need to do that yet. And so, we could do more, but it's kind of like I'm the limiting factor at the moment.
Well, like the technology is, it's gonna go out there. Like who's got? I mean, if we could have a litmus test for a biological age test, which we can't, so now we do have to extract some blood. Then, even that with a litmus test, like this is it. So I'm pretty excited about this. All right, so we'll get into our wrap-up questions, and these are longevity focused, and some of them you can drive from learnings that you have because you've seen great ESR data and bad ESR data, and maybe you've got some tips to help people with. But we'll start with Bob. Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
I think I do. I am a longevity. I believe there's no limit. I believe it's limitless, right? What humans can live to. So, I have a particular interest because I'm a dad, but I didn't have a child until I was 50. And so I'm an older dad. and so I want to stick around for a while, right? To go through all the important events with my daughter, who's now 16. And the my mom died at age 65. So I was pancreatic cancer. So I was 30. I was 30 years old when my mom died, and you would think, okay, that's like a full grown human being at 30, but that was too young, right? That had an impact on me, that I lost my first parent when I was 30. That seemed too young. So yeah, I want to live. I want to live past that and well past that, for my daughter. And
And
so yeah,
you may have answered this already, and I think you kind of have. But how long do you think humans can live?
I think it's limitless. I don't
Yeah.
think there's a natural limit. I think we've already, in maybe not my lifetime, but certainly my parents' lifetime, we've already doubled the expected life expectancy of humans. So why can't we double that again? I think we can.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. All right. What are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets? Let's call them shortcuts, because everybody likes shortcuts for longevity and a long health span that you would share. And hopefully this is kind of driven from some of the data that you have from ESR tests.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say there's my own personal experience, and then there's what the data shows me, and I can talk about both. So I
Yeah, let's
have
do your own personal, so what would you recommend? And then we'll get to what's recommended from the ESR results.
right. Yeah. So it is. This is I do see in the data that things are very personalized. So what works for one person will not work for another person. So not consistently anyway. So what works for me, I would say, right at the top of the list, this probably does work for everyone, is sleep, right? If you're not getting enough sleep, your ESR inflammation is going to start rising up. And I can clearly see that in my own data, right? If I'm having sleepless nights because I'm designing something new, right? And I stay up way too late, that my inflammation goes up. And so I don't know what you have to titrate it with yourself to see how much sleep you actually need to get your ESR back in line. And so for me, it's somewhere between 7 and 8 hours. I actually need that. My body actually needs that. Then I invoke my most important food related strategy is tart cherry juice. I think I might have mentioned this to you at the show. So tart cherry juice is incredibly anti-inflammatory for me, and it's sleep promoting. So it has a double whammy. So I drink 4 ounces of tart cherry juice at bedtime, puts me out cold, right? So it's a sleep producing thing, and then it has its own anti-inflammatory effects through the compounds that are in tart cherries. And I don't know whether you're aware of this, but most major sports teams at college professional level are now using tart cherry juice in their training regimen. So after a workout, especially where they're working their large muscles, all of the athletes are drinking tart cherry juice. So it's become a thing. It's kind of quiet because nobody wants to give away their trade secrets to the competition. But I find it to be kind of magic. In our data sets, I've noticed other people reporting tags and notes we have in the app, right? So we see other people reporting tart cherry juice, yeah, and their inflammation goes down. Another one is various eating styles. So both the absolute lowest inflammation level tag, associated tag in our data is a ketogenic eating style. So, so that seems to be very anti-inflammatory as a ketogenic style. Another one is intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting people are well lower than average in our patient population. So those seem to both be very good eating styles.
Excellent. Those are great tips and driven by data. I like that. Are there 1 or 2 things that you think people get absolutely wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
I would say the important thing is whether something is sustainable or not. So that's, I mean, I just got finished talking about ketogenic or paleo sort of dieting styles. I think I would say for most people, that's unfortunately not sustainable, right? So that might be a mistake, right? To lean into keto and paleo for most people, because you just can't keep it up. It's just not, it's too extreme of a lifestyle, right? So I would prefer, and I don't do that, I would prefer to, through a combination of fruits and vegetables and getting proper sleep, I would prefer to drive my inflammation down that way rather than to drive it down through eating nothing but meat.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But that might be right for somebody. I don't know.
I like what they're getting wrong is picking up something that isn't going to be sustainable.
Yeah, the sustainability is really what it's about.
All right, Bob, how can people contact you?
Very simple. The company is COR Health, COR HEALTH, and I'm Bob at corhealth.com.
Awesome. That's the one that you thought was Steve Jobs. You thought it would be Steve at.
I thought it would be Steve. It turned out to be S.Jobs at apple.com.
How many iterations did it take you to get that?
Just twice. The second one worked.
Twice? Oh, that's good.
Yeah, the second time worked.
What in the near future are you excited about?
Well, I think giving people their data directly to people is my passion, and I continue to want to tell this as a consumer-based story. There are some, I say direct to consumer, and that's really what floats my boat. We are working now with some service providers, especially gyms. So there are some gyms and personal trainers who are really, really good out there, and they're incorporating COR into their protocols. So that would be more of a B2B model, where the trainer or the gym is selling our equipment to their users, and so that's more of a B2B. So I'm interested in ramping that up right now as well. That's occupying some of my mind share.
I think I introduced you to one such one. I think can't remember his name.
Yeah, you did. And there's that person. Plus, there are several others that are in the mix at the moment. So
there was a kind of spa wellness center. I think that's a really, really cool model.
Yeah.
All right. So you can contact Bob at COR Health. That's COR Health.com. This has been a fantastic interview. Bob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. It was my pleasure. Great to see you again.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.